So welcome everyone to this panel discussion where we will present Project Sylva. It's a new initiative by the Linux Foundation's branch in Europe. And we will also discuss trends and patterns, cloud-native patterns and trends such as sustainable operations, green ops, that are gaining traction especially in the cloud-native ecosystem, and that are also integrated in Project Sylva. So without further ado, I will let our panelists today introduce themselves. Maybe Philippe?
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, Nikki. My name is Philippe Ansarguet. I'm a Chief Technology Officer at Orange Business, so the enterprise market company of Orange Group, and I'm leading the technology strategy.
Right, good. Is this working?
No, not really. Let's try it.
All right, so they gave me a fake mic.
On purpose.
On purpose, of course, right? Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Tim Irnich. I work at SUSE. We are a provider of open source-based infrastructure solutions in the Linux and container space, and I'm the product manager for Telco Edge for our Telco Cloud solution.
Hello, I'm Jonas Onninen. I work for Nokia, and I'm responsible for our open source activities. So I'm head of open source initiatives in Nokia. So we run the Nokia SOSPO and run our contribution coordination and our activities externally and internally on open source.
And I'm Nikki Manoledaki. I'm a software engineer at Weaveworks. I was previously a maintainer of the EKS CLI for Amazon, and I'm a contributor to the CNCF Environmental Sustainability Technical Advisory Group, as well as the GitOps Working Group. So first, we're going to introduce Project Sylva. We have a couple of slides just for this part that Philippe will present now.
Okay, I will do it in standard mode. It would be more convenient for me. So what is Project Sylva? So Project Sylva is an industrial-grade cloud-native platform to cover, I would say, telco and edge use case. So it's a project that has been started nearly 18 months ago in a closed explanatory mode by 5 carriers. So it's about Deutsche Telekom, Telefonica, Telecom Italia, Vodafone, and Orange, plus 2 network vendors, so Ericsson and Nokia. And it has been set in open source at Linux Foundation Europe. It's the first hosted project by the Linux Foundation Europe, and it has been open in last November. So basically, the project is quite new, and most of the contribution has started at the beginning of this year. So you may see that the core challenges we want to manage is about simplify and automate the operational model. It's about reducing the fragmentation, working on interoperability, reduce the cost. And we have 2 key cores, I would say, outcomes. The first one is to define a framework where we can, I would say, put the story in a box with all the prerequisites. And the second outcome is about having a reference implementation and integration and validation playbook, okay? So what is really important is to understand that the prerequisites that are at the heart of the Sylva project is basically to cover 5G, Open RAN and edge cases. It supports, I would say, specific hardware needs on network cards or in GPU, for instance. It's about supporting natively bare metal, multi-tenancy, service mesh enable, high advanced security, and something that is very important, and the purpose of the talk of today is about the sustainability. If we move on the next slide, what is important here is just to say that, okay, Sylva is a project that is born, I would say, between the hands of telco and network vendors from Europe, but it's absolutely not Europe-bounded. So if the overall roadmap is driven by, I would say, this ecosystem, it's really open to everyone, and it's very important. And on this slide, you may see that there is a room for everyone, whether you are in hardware, in telco, in integration, about the network function, or if you are an integrators, there are room absolutely for you here. And something that is very important as well, the idea is not to deliver a product nor a solution, okay? So the implementation reference that is in the project will be, I would say, productized and developed and instantiated inside the different, I would say, telco flavors. On the last slides, what is really important if we want to bring some information about the track of records, I think that in basically 3 months, what have been done, it's to have 160 members in the Slack channel, so it's a lot of people and a lot of discussion. You may say that we have more than 150 features, 750 addition code, so commit basically, so it's really interesting. We have 4 validation platform under creation and 3 from different companies. So above the 7th initial companies at the initial phase of Sylva, we have 9 other new companies in just, I would say, 3 months. 6 work groups, so we have the implementation, we have the validation, we have the security, we have the communication, we have the governance, and of course, a dedicated working group on sustainability. And Nikki, you are part of this one. And perhaps the last thing to share, by this summer, the idea is to have a first version of the framework. We already have an implementation reference that is working on OpenStack and on VMware, and the idea is to have a new one this summer that will cover the bare metal topic. So here is for setting the stage about basically what is Sylva.
Thank you very much. And also we have a QR code here if you'd like to look at the GitLab repos for Project Sylva. And there you'll find a white paper, the governance structure, how to join the meetings, the Slack channels as well, etc. And it's basically GitLab Sylva projects if you don't want to scan the QR code. Given that we have different perspectives here from the telco cloud, telco ecosystem, it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts, Tim and Jona, on Project Sylva.
All right, so yeah, so the reason my company, Sylva, we are involved in Sylva is that we are building open source based infrastructure platforms that we think can be used for the telco industry as well. We are finding ourselves, when we work with our customers, we're finding ourselves solving the same problems over and over again in slightly different ways for different customers. And I think we've seen across the presentations today that basically everybody in the industry is doing that, right? Everybody is faced with the same problems. Everybody is solving them over and over again. And that's what makes a project like Sylva interesting from my point of view, because it is a common proving ground for existing technology, figuring out how to set everything up, how to configure things so that certain use cases become possible, and essentially distilling all that into code that then is available to everyone. Either as a reference in the sense of where can I look to in order to find out how I need to do things, or basically just using it straight away and either getting inspiration for your own product or just using it as is. So the industry can benefit a lot from a project like Sylva because it can be a common denominator for information exchange and also implementation, and that's why we are there.
And for Nokia, we've actually been active in different kind of open source cloud infrastructure compatibility projects very much from the beginning, kind of like starting with OPNFV, then CNTT, what became Manucat, and now of course Sylva. And in Sylva we've been actually active since the very beginning. As Philip showed, we were one of the 2 vendors that were active or participant to this from the kind of like from the get-go. In Sylva itself, we're active as well. We are have Jouni Hämäläinen in the TSC, and we are have a Saundari Kannan who's running the working group 4, which we will be talking a little bit more about, which is the energy efficiency working group in the Sylva. We believe a lot on the cloud infrastructure compatibility and, like Tim said as well, doing things one time and doing the things the one time. And therefore, we believe that Sylva is an excellent activity, especially as we have a lot of the key operators from Europe who are coming together and who are looking at that. What are the kind of like ways that especially European operators can work together and how they can solve things in the same way. And this, of course, like Philip says, there is an open invitation for anybody to join. That then, with the cooperation with the upstream projects like Anuket, is extremely important, what we see as well. And that we can basically look at how do we use cloud and how we are compatible with cloud infrastructure in the telco space. Looking at that not only from the cloud infrastructure perspective, but looking at it also from the cloud network functions or cloud native network functions, CNF perspective as well, is important. So we are very excited to be in this project, and we are very excited about Sylva.
And if you could summarize very quickly before we jump to the sustainability and energy efficiency part of this conversation, very quickly, what are your thoughts on the prerequisites, the core pillars that will make Project Sylva a success? Yeah.
Okay, I can start. So I think that there are several pillars. Definitively the first one for me is about measuring, having the information about what we can make more sustainable, basically. The second one is in traditional telco environment, the part of the idle part of the system is too much important, so we need to reduce this. We need to have, I would say, a better capacity of the compute density. So for all those reasons, at the end, it's a better management of the underlying hardware. And I think that with Sylva and with the current mood in which we are in a position to define a new way of designing architecture that will put, I would say, the sustainability by book and by design in the story. And that's why we need to have such a project.
Okay. Thank you. So looking at both the kind of like the sustainability part, but also Sylva as a whole a little bit here. So of course, Sylva as a whole, I think that what we often do in Nokia, how do we look at if something can be successful is, and especially in open source, that first of all, you need a common problem that you think that needs solving. And then what you need after that is that a commonality on that this is a problem actually that it's something that the industry needs to solve, and we are the right people to solve it. Then look at that there is basically the timing for that is right, and the governance for that is right. And that is basically something that looking at those, when those things come together, you usually have a successful project. I think that with Sylva, we're getting there, and we kind of like, we have a common problem. We have alignment on how to solve that. We have support on kind of like of the companies, like Philip said, there are already 160 people getting into active there. So we have the support. So therefore the timing must be right. And of course we selected Linux Foundation partly for that, because it is actually has neutral and good governance for open source projects. Then coming to the sustainability part here, the things that Philip said are extremely important. And what we think that we need to look at really building metrics of how we follow that, what is the energy consumption of the actual CNF. How do we go penetrate through that we see that what are the kind of like, what are the differences of that what is different kind of like abstraction layers in the cloud, and see that we're really kind of like what is the energy consumption of a single CNF. And then we can, when we can measure it, then we can see how we can optimize that as well.
Yeah, and just to layer on top of that, I would have said almost everything you said as well, so I'll not repeat it. But I think there is one particular thing that Sylva is doing very well right now, which is spending a lot of time on consumability. Because at the end of the day, this is about building software or integrating software into a system that can actually be used. And if you look at some of the earlier initiatives, what I find good about Sylva is that the Sylva stack, as it exists today, is very consumable. It has good documentation. It has an easily understandable structure. There is the team in Working Group 1 has spent a lot of time thinking about how can we structure the system so that it is extensible and that it can be consumed in a modular way. So I think that is what makes Sylva, what gives Sylva better chances of success than maybe some of the earlier initiatives, because it is tangible, it can be used, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to actually get a running system.
And so now, with environmental sustainability in the cloud ecosystem, we see things happening. Things were very different a year ago to 6 months ago to 3 months ago. We see the environmental sustainability tag in the CNCF. We have a sustainability subgroup in the GitOps working group as well, where we are measuring the energy efficiency of different GitOps architectures. And there are tools such as Kepler, which is an open source tool maintained by Red Hat, which is to measure the energy consumption per pod or namespace. It exports data. It's an eBPF-based tool, so it exports data to Prometheus on the energy consumption of resources that it can link to pods and namespaces and nodes as a whole. We also see the Green Software Foundation that is now currently working on a software carbon intensity index that is going to be an ISO standard very soon. And so with all that said, that is on the cloud native kind of evolution of GreenOps, which is kind of the new term for this. It's not particularly new, but it's gaining traction. But with all of that in mind, Project Sylva is in a unique position to drive a cloud-native stack for telcos that puts energy efficiency and sustainability at the core. And with that in mind, what do environmentally sustainable operations look like for telcos, and what steps can be taken in this transition, and how can Project Sylva help with this?
I think here that we must spend time on what matters the most. And when you take into account the different level of the scope 1, the scope 2, and the scope 3, for instance, in telco environment, scope 1 and 2 is at best 15%. It means that scope 3 is 85%. When you have the 85% on scope 3, it's, I would say, the mammoth is the hardware and the software is the mice. So basically, we need to turn off the infrastructure if we want to win the battle of the sustainability. So here, what is interesting with this approach, with this cloud-native approach by book, is to, I would say, augment the compute density to lower the form factor on the hardware side. And to do so, I think that something that is extremely important is that we need to deploy on top of our infrastructure, I would say, more fine-grained or more modular, I would say, CNF. That because if we take into account from the past and from the legacy, we are mainly, I would say, manipulating something that are very big and very monolithic, and it's not so easy to make them scale up and scale down. So power off and power up. So I think that it's really important to understand where we need to spend time first.
And I mean, just making sure. It's working, okay. So, I mean, just making sure we use the existing capabilities of the stack, right? I mean, the introduction of the separation of infrastructure layer and the application on top that we're getting through the introduction of cloud native principles unlocks a lot of potential for energy savings, but we haven't actually as an industry not really started utilizing that, at least not to the full extent. And figuring out how to do that is something that a project like Sylva can facilitate significantly, because it needs to be done in a way that is essentially a shared approach across the industry, because that's the only way we can get enough muscle behind the initiative. If we approach this problem in basically the same way as we originally approached the integration challenge for telco cloud infrastructure in general, which started about 10 years ago, roughly, it will just be too late to enable the operators to fulfill their carbon footprint reduction targets. So we have to start using what is available today, and we have to actually industrialize that. And that is what I'm excited about in the working group 4 in Sylva. A project like Sylva can make the difference in such an undertaking.
Yeah, I mean, like when you said that it's about 10 years that when we started to kind of work on this, I thought that no, now Tim is kind of like mistaken. It can't be that long, but no, it actually is that long. It is over 10, or it's about 10 years. It's 9-10 years now. Anyways, most probably kind of like everything has been said, but not by everybody, so I will speak a little bit about this as well. So I think that what Tim said, and I'll build on that, it's really important that we understand that what we measure and what we measure the same things. We understand that there is a commonality in this, and we basically work together on the kind of like that we get the right kind of like measurements, we get the right kind of like, we understand that what we're comparing are really the same things, and we have a common approach. And this is very important in this, and the way is kind of like, and that we don't get different kind of approaches where we then don't actually gather their data in the same way, that we don't understand it in the same way. This is, I think this is extremely important in this, and this is where they kind of like where open source can standardize approaches on how to move forward, and especially in the kind of like sustainability part and in energy consumption in particularly now here is basically something that there is work to be done, and there is an open, there is work that is not that much addressed in other places yet, especially what comes to the telco area.
And yeah, I think one more kind of piece of information that I wanted to share with you all is also the Green Software Foundation has a catalog of cloud patterns for reducing and optimizing around energy consumption and for sustainability. So it will be really interesting to see how these different open source communities can work together to share information about these optimizations for this use case, as well as there's a white paper that the Environmental Sustainability Tag just published today that also covers a lot of tools and studies and initiatives around this as well. So with that in mind, what are the challenges that exist currently that limit this transition to sustainable operations? What are some of these challenges, and how could they be overcome?
Well, in my mind, being so I always, I mean, in our discussions, I'm always the sort of the person that tries to approach things from a pragmatic point of view, like what is it that we can actually do. And I think the biggest barrier of actually creating, let's say, automation to automatically minimize the energy consumption of infrastructure is that we don't have standardized ways of collecting data and actually defining metrics. Data availability is the starting point for any kind of automated, any kind of automation loop that can, for example, turn off things at night or can enable the network to allocate capacity according to traffic patterns and all that. And we in the telco industry, we've known for decades that traffic patterns basically follow human behaviors, at least most of the time. Now with the advances in IoT, that starts to break up a little bit, but there are still spatial and temporal patterns of traffic that create a lot of potential for energy savings. But knowing where energy consumption occurs, when does it occur, and why does it occur, is what we, on the scale of an entire network, cannot really determine today, because every network is a multi-vendor infrastructure, and there is not enough commonality across vendors to really answer those questions on a network level today. I mean, I think Philippe will probably agree, it's for an operator, it's really, really challenging to tell at a given point in time how much energy does my network consume and why. Which part of the utilization is causing which part of the energy consumption. And that is the problem that we need to solve first, and then we can build automation on top of that information availability. But as Jonas said, we have to standardize this so that we can compare apples to apples, and then we need to start building technology that can act based on that information.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and the kind of like building on that great thing that Tim said is that, and we need to understand really kind of like which layer uses, which layer is consuming energy at what point. So we need to also kind of like model that how much actually the CNF is using, how much of the infrastructure is using, and what are the other services using around it. I'm like, Philippe already talked about this a little bit earlier, that how much of the energy is actually consumed by the network function as in general, and this is quite small when you think about that already 10% is just kind of like of the electricity is used for actually transporting the energy itself. Around 30% is used by kind of like components that really don't do networking, like power, kind of like kind of heating, cooling, power, and so on. And even after that, around 20% is then used for like ventilators and so on. And so that is kind of like something that we really need to get to the bottom of this. And of course, in the cloud, it is a little bit more difficult because you have different layers of kind of like abstraction. So you need to know what you measure, that you're not measuring the wrong thing there. And this is something that also that when we're building kind of like what Tim said about automation that can help us with this. So for instance, we see as a company that the role of AI, of actually of kind of like looking for that, how energy can be saved, is very important, but AI is useless without data. So we need to get the right, really to the bottom of the right data.
Yeah. And so the tool also, Kepler, it does use, they're working, Red Hat and IBM and also Intel, and with also my help at WeWorks, we're working on a machine learning model to, everybody clap, I'm kidding.
They're clapping for you.
Yeah. So there's a model to predict these patterns of energy consumption and see how to be able to reduce this, etc. But of course, machine learning models have their own carbon footprint. So lastly, I really wanted to ask you about, because we're talking about operating models quite a lot here, like GreenOps and FinOps as well is relevant, since FinOps, which looks at financial cost, can also be used to kind of infer carbon emissions and energy consumption, in that if you reduce the financial costs, potentially this could this could mean a reduction in emissions if that comes from optimization, resource efficiency, etc. So with these operating models that Project Sylva aims to consolidate, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what you think they mean for telco operations. And Philippe, if you'd like.
Yeah, okay. I think that it's why I don't want to answer on the previous question, because for me, something that is very important is that by design, Sylva project, I would say, has integrated the GitOps approach. So we are using Fluxcd, for instance. And something that is really interesting is that basically, I love the slide from Vuk, the first one. Case is complicated, but in telco, it's more complicated than ever. And I think he's right. We need to manage two very difficult challenges, complexity and scalability. And GitOps is the perfect fit for this. You mentioned that about Project Kepler, for instance, my partner in crime described the importance of, I would say, having the right metering, the right measures, and with the right semantic. And something that is really interesting, we all know the property of GitOps and its ability to tie the operation, the deployment and the operation about the infrastructure, about the application, about policy, and we can do as well the same for the sustainability, because we can manage the desired state, we can manage the drift that we will measure, I would say, live in the reconciliation loop. So GitOps for me is something absolutely fundamental, and it's a relationship with a kind of triangle. So we have the GitOps that enable, I would say, the FinOps, because the cost is a very interesting proxy metric, because mastering the cost will have a direct impact on sustainability. So it opened the doors about the GreenOps. So for me, the magic triangle is about the GitOps, the FinOps, and the GreenOps, who are definitively, I'm pretty sure, a very big impact in the operational model. And the operational model, I think, is important because the auto-healing and the self-capability in terms of resiliency of the infrastructure will definitively lead to new way of operating, I would say, telco cloud or whatever networking infrastructure. So yes, I think that we used to have what we may call the SRE in the digital world. We will have the NRE in the network or telco world. So yes, I think that GitOps is a core pillar of the success of the Project Sylva.
Yeah, I mean, just to layer on top, I think the fundamental principle behind Kubernetes-based infrastructure is the operator pattern, which is essentially a reconciliation between actual state and wanted state. And that concept lends itself very well to energy consumption optimization too. Right? So we have the prerequisites, we have the tools available, we just have to start using them. And again, Sylva is in a good place, or Sylva is a good place to do this together as an industry, because that's what's going to make the whole undertaking successful in the end.
Yeah, and looking at that, I kind of like, basically Sylva is a great place for looking at this from the telco perspective, and that's what we're going to do there as well. One thing that I think that Nika just said a little bit earlier is about the other activities that are happening in other places like CNCF and so on. We have to also in Sylva be clear that we don't do this in isolation, and that we're in connection with the other industries that are trying to reach towards the same goals as well. So Sylva is a good place for us to kind of like, as an industry, to get together. But we, of course, shouldn't never forget the cooperation with the kind of like other industries and the other players that are also working in similar kind of environments.
And to close this off, I think it would be really great to have a note on what to take away from this. From my side, I really wanted to mention that there, it's important to note there is regulation also that has been implemented in the EU, and there's some, such as it's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, EU CSRD, as well as in the US, there's the SEC Climate Disclosure Rule. So there are things that will happen, in 2025, and the tools that we were discussing are also kind of being built in advance with these things in mind, where Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 carbon emissions will have to be reported by especially publicly traded companies. So the tools for, these cases that will be in 2 or 3 years from now are being built today, and we're working, to prepare for these things that will come. But from your perspectives, what is one thing that you would like the audience to take away from this about Project Sylva and the cloud-native telco stack that we're building?
2 words: join us.
And I think my main takeaway is, or what I would like everybody to take away is, we have to make progress fast as an industry. The regulation Nikki is mentioning is heading our way, and we don't have enough time to use the usual length of our innovation cycles to solve this problem. So we have to start. I mean, there are lots of longer-term initiatives and concepts coming that will make things easier over time. But the timescale in which regulation is likely going to be put in place are shorter than those cycles likely will be. So my pledge would be, let's start with the technology that we have today. Let's apply it to this problem. There is a lot that can be gained already now, and let's work together to make that happen. If everybody stays in their own silo, we will be much less successful than we possibly could be.
Yeah, as a company, Nokia, we are underlying very much sustainability, and this is something that we feel very passionate about, and that's why we're really proud that we get the chance of kind of like leading the working group 4 here, which is the energy efficiency working group. So about time, I would add to that, it's not only the regulation, it's the planet itself that is kind of like, we need to move fast. And for that, I really would like to say, conclude on that, what Philip said. Please join us. This is great, exciting work. We're great, exciting people, and please join us and let's make it happen.
I don't know if we have time for questions. Do you think we have time for... We have to stop. Yeah. But you can find us afterwards, and you can talk to us and join the Slack. And
no, it's working. They just need to activate it. Unfortunately, we are just now behind the schedule a bit. So we'll need to do the closing remarks, or...
Yep.
I would say let's continue with the Q&A later today in the event and in the post, but we have a closing and then we are free to go for lunch.
Okay.
Thank you.